Hi Ben, lovely to speak to you again. How are you doing?
Very good, Sam. Very good today.
Perfect, fantastic. And I think obviously just following on from the fully charged events in which we were both there in Farnborough, I think we got talking a little bit around sort of charging and charging infrastructure, and you had a really nice insight into sort of public charging and how that sort of become the I guess the charging of last resort. I mean, let's explore that a little bit. I mean, what's your background in this space?
Well, I've been in the transit and mobility space for a number of years. My first startup in the space was Masabi, which is a public transit ticketing company, and we started by defining the kind of digital and mobile ticketing standard for United Kingdom Rail. That's now spread across the whole country. So if you're buying a ticket on Trainline and showing your phone to get through the gates or show to the conductor, that's the technology we rolled out there. And we then took that around the world, and it now supplies major cities like New York and Los Angeles, Vegas, and we've got installations everywhere from Australia to Alaska, doing about $1 billion a year of tickets. So a great British export. And really, really good for getting people using the most appropriate sort of a mobility choice. And, my view very much is mobility is a mix. There are places where people really should be on mass transit links. Getting in and out of any major city, you should be, if you're going a decent distance, you should be on a train or something. The train that I go in and out of London on, and this is a flat-fronted, boring common or garden commuter train. Nothing exciting. It doesn't count as high-speed rail. And it gets me straight into the middle of London at over 90 miles an hour. And there's no self-driving magic Google car technology, which is going to allow, and I think it carries something like 4 jumbo jets worth of people. So this train, which has two human beings operating it, so it's got a driver and it's got a conductor for safety of 4 jumbo jets worth of people, slams me right into the middle of London. 4 jumbo jets worth of people get off in a few minutes, and it goes back out there and does it again. And the sheer number of cars and the space that would take up on roads and the space that would take up in parking is mind-blowingly enormous compared to getting people in and out like that. So, big cities, the geometry needs mass transit. And whether that's, bus and especially BRT, which is where you have a dedicated lane for buses, especially express-style buses that don't stop at every hole in the hedge, but, make longer hops between stops. That really is how the big cities should work. But then as we get into lower density areas, I think cars and possibly the advent of self-driving cars is going to make it easier for us to not have to park them everywhere. And I hope also a future where we don't buy a car that is sized for the biggest journey we do every year. Because right now, if you have a family and you want to go camping once a year, you get a big SUV with a roof box and everything, so you can put the family and its bags and everything for holiday and go a long journey. And for the rest of the year, that car is almost entirely empty. People who are using the car to get to work, it's a single human being in a 2-ton armchair. And that's just not required. So with the advent of self-driving cars, I think it will be not only much more easy to summon a self-driving vehicle to come and take you somewhere and you not have to park it and care and feed for it, but also you'll be able to summon an appropriately sized one. So for most of your regular time, whether you're in the early stages, it's going to be you can summon a hire car that you then drive around, or it actually drives you everywhere itself. You'll be getting a small 1 or 2 person vehicle when it is just 1 or 2 people popping to the shops, popping to work, something like that. And then when you are going to go to IKEA and get a load of big furniture, or you're going to, take the entire family to Inverness and go camping and you need everything, then you can summon a big MPV. You can summon something with a huge van on the back of it and not have to have that sat in your driveway for the rest of the year. And, I look forward with encouragement towards that, as long as road pricing stops people just letting their personal self-driving car just drive around London waiting to pick them up and, clogging up the roads. We need to make sure we don't end up with deadheading self-driving cars, clogging everything up. So there's threat as well as something wonderful. But where we are right now is not self-driving cars. Where we are now is we're making the transition from gas guzzlers to EVs, and people are having to change their habits. And people are getting, in some cases, commuter EVs, and EVs that are good for the bulk of journeys in the UK are less than 5 miles in a car. Most of what you're using for SDP, social domestic pleasure, is sub 5 miles. Doesn't require a lot of electricity to do it. You don't need a giant car with a giant battery, but you do need to charge it. And the main place we want to switch people from gas guzzlers to EVs is not the long distance journeys and the motorways. It's driving around in the middle of cities where everyone lives. It's driving around delivering kids to school and going to the shops and going to work. It's all those sub 5 miles journeys where we don't want people idling next to school pickup. We don't want people kind of spewing the gas out. But the people who live in high density cities get the rough end of the deal in the current world of EV, because many of the people living in cities do not have driveways. All the richer or the rural people have driveways and space, and they can put a charger at home and charge up every night when they're plugged in. But the people in cities, they're living in terraced houses. They don't generally have their own private parking because land is so scarce and people live close together. And I know, especially in the EV world, we all put a brave face on, and we have a lot of early adopters of EVs who are okay to kind of understand that the new thing still has some creaky edges, but we have to, grab this thorn, grab this nettle and say, to be honest, having an EV, if you don't have a driveway, kind of sucks. It really is very annoying. If I have this EV in the middle of a city and I don't have a driveway and I can't park it and charge it at home, because at the moment regulations won't even let me fit a charger to my house if I don't have a driveway, every week I have to take the vehicle to some sort of charging facility somewhere else, plug it in and leave it for a number of hours, and then come back to the car to retrieve it, because I can't leave it there blocking that space. I have to take it away. So I'm having to do some sort of non-car journey to and from it, or sit in it for an hour or two while it charges. And to add further insult to my annoyingly having to go somewhere and refuel it, I have to pay up to 5 times as much for the privilege. So we've got the kind of, good and bad side of EV ownership. The good side of EV ownership is every time you get in the car, it's full. You no longer have to go to petrol stations most of the time. It fills up in your driveway. But if you live in a town, all of those regular charges, they are being done expensively and they are being done at an inconvenient place. And that's really annoying. And we at Kerbo Charge, the new startup I've joined with Mike Goulden, we're trying to improve that. We've been working with councils to get a safe cable solution, which is a little self-closing flap that goes in the pavement, so that you can charge a car in the city by charging from the front of your house, and then pop your cable in under this self-closing flap, which keeps it flush with the pavement. It's not going to wake any babies sort of driving over it in their buggies, and you can charge your car off-peak. You can access that lower cost electricity in the off-peak times, and you can do slow charging, which is fantastic, rather than fast charging, which is better for battery life, but also a lot better for the national grid. And that means you join the great thing about EVs, which is you generally don't have to refuel them. Every time you get back into your car, it generally has a mostly full battery, and you go off and you do your standard journey, you come back, and you never have to go to a petrol station again. Unless you're doing this occasional holiday journey or long distance journey or something else where you do then have to go and pay 5 times as much for a fast charger because you want it to charge while you're grabbing a sandwich and a cup of coffee. But this is what we discussed at Fully Charged, really for the EV revolution to work and not be the terrible headlines that were in the Sun about meltdown of the grid and we don't have enough generation capacity, is, I really think most of the normal use of EVs should be powered by domestic off-peak charging. slow off-peak charging. It's not something that's going to require the grid to be upgraded because we need huge amounts of electricity to flow out into all these vehicles. It's not something that's going to require giant amounts of extra generation because all of our cars are switching from petroleum, which we are shipping on boats from all over the world. And I think something like up to 20% of all the oil created, all the oil extracted, is then used up in moving oil around. Just in running the infrastructure of getting oil to the place that we want the energy, which is ridiculous. So if we can get everyone using off-peak, if we can get everyone doing domestic, 7 kilowatts or less, then the grid's fine for that. I mean, the national grid at the moment is overnight doing a third less demand than during the day. But if I take my inner city car while I'm awake and go to a fast charge point and want it to be done quickly and then go away again, that's peak time. During the day, that's when it's gas peaker plant. That's when it's fossil fuels. That's when it's going to put a huge extra demand in terms of number of megawatts, gigawatts are needed by a given city. If this city is now adding all of these cars, which used to be powered by petrol brought in on tankers, but now is being powered by electricity coming through the wires, that city might not have that much spare capacity to take the peak time in the day and add another third. But if we shifted all of that to the off-peak time, that extra third is available. The wires in the street aren't going to heat up. The wires in the house aren't going to heat up. They're all doing nothing overnight. So the more we can get to off-peak, the better. And the more this demand from the cars is flexible. And if your car is plugged into your house whenever it's parked there, it means when we have a load of excess solar during the summer, that could all be thrown through the smart chargers straight into the car during the middle of the summer and then not taken overnight. We don't need to fill that, and we don't have a storage issue for all of that excess solar. Then we don't have to draw as much power from Europe. But all of this requires us to get the vehicles not plugged in occasionally onto fast chargers. It needs us to have most of the vehicles doing most of their miles from slow domestic charging, where the car is plugged in, it can take advantage of the available power and available grid capacity and charge then. And this is why, I think the transition to EVs is going to be domestically powered, and the fast public chargers are the charger of last resort. It's only for holidays, it's only for long journeys. That's when you won't even care that it's 5 times more expensive to charge at 150 kilowatt hours and get it done really quickly, because you're only using it occasionally. The rest of the time, your dominant price of power for your car is off-peak power. Whether that's a smart tariff from one of the new startup energy companies, which gives you access to wholesale prices, so you are drinking that wonderful middle-of-the-day cheap solar rather than overnight. And the cars are a wonderful use of that power. And it might be the problem of renewable power being variable kind of gets soaked up into vehicle demand as we see more and more of the cars go electric.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really, really nice point there. And I mean, in a way, do we almost treat our cars like phones? We have to plug them in every single night, when if we're doing these short trips, it's a case of, well, we can almost run it down. We don't need to be taking out of the grid. We can actually leave an available space for someone else to use. I think we touched upon that sort of model as well, almost monetizing your own sort of charge point as well. I mean, how would that look?
Well, certainly in the middle of cities, there's been an overtaking of demand for EV charging compared to the number of people with EVs. Suddenly EVs have got very popular, the infrastructure hasn't kept up, and sometimes people need to charge, and the available chargers are full of vehicles, and there's nowhere to charge. So one of the things we're going to be enabling with Kerbo Charge is so that when somebody in a high-density residential area does put one of these Kerbo Charge kind of on-street charging systems in for, in a load of terraced houses. I think there's something like 8 million terraced houses in the United Kingdom, and they're all in these big cities. So if you've put in a Kerbo Charge and you only need to charge it once a week for your car, you can open it up to share it with other people. And so the app that we're bringing out later in the year allows you to share your charge. It puts a few extra pence on per kilowatt hour So that will make you a few quid extra if somebody fills their battery from you. But even that few extra quid is going to make this charge cheaper for your neighbours and anyone who's sharing it than any public charge point. So similarly, this is going to take pressure off public chargers and get people onto the sort of domestic areas, and again allow people who are turning up and parking their car overnight to access those off-peak tariffs and to take advantage of a long charging period. So a smart charger can then say, I'm going to put you during the solar peak during the middle of the day, or I'm going to do it overnight when there's less grid demand. But again, this is, let's get a distributed, slow charging network all over these residential areas, which people who are near those can be using. And it means you don't need every single house in the terrace street to have a charger. As long as you've got 1 in 5 or 1 in 3, you're going to find some charger somewhere. And if you're renting a house, you don't need to have a charger on your house. You just use one of the others, or you're visiting a friend, there'll be one nearby, because every few driveways might have a shareable point. And it's all shared on the app like a public charger. You just put your credit card in, it turns on automatically, and you charge and you walk away. You don't have to have a conversation with someone about turning their charger on. But I think it's going to make it a lot less anxiety-inducing if everywhere you find lots of people, there will be lots of charging points. And you're not kind of waiting in line for the supercharger every time you think, I need a bit of a top-up overnight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this conversation leads itself into a bit of future development in terms of vehicle to grid, sort of almost like backwards charging in a way. Effectively, if you plug your car in, that could effectively act as an outside generator for your home during the evening when you're sort of cooking and things like that, and then power charge overnight. I mean, would that be the future in your opinion?
Oh, I certainly believe that's the future, and people who've had concerns around battery degradation have found that if you're not fast charging batteries and you're not overheating them, it doesn't really seem to hit the battery life. In fact, some of the Nissan Leaf vehicle-to-grid systems found they were actually getting better battery life from batteries that had this gentle, slow cycling from the vehicle-to-grid life, rather than the deep cycling behaviour they were seeing from people who do a big, massive one-hit charge every now and then. So I think when you've got all of those rare earths, all of that high-density storage available in your car, but you're only doing 5-mile journeys, all of that spare capacity can be used to smooth out the demand of your home and smooth out the availability of renewables, whether it's coming off your own solar or it's coming off the grid, wind and solar. If we can dump that in and out of cars, we can avoid creating extra battery storage where it's not needed. I cannot wait to get a vehicle-to-home charger for my house, and I'm thwarted only by the fact they're not commercially available yet. I live in hope that by later this year they will be available outside of the pilots, but it's such a good use of resources and also money. I mean, now thanks to EV pricing coming back in line with normal pricing, I'm an absolute hound for second-hand cars. I don't think I've ever bought a new one, and probably won't ever. But instead of paying 10 grand for a house battery that only runs the house, and 10 grand will get you, I don't know, maybe a 10 kilowatt battery, 10 kilowatt hour, I could spend 7 or 8 grand on a second-hand Nissan Leaf that has a 35 kilowatt hour battery, use that to run the house, and my battery can actually be a spare car to occasionally run us to, the shops, run us to the beach, run us to, these standard less than 5-mile or less than 100-mile journeys without tying up, a whole load of battery to be in my house. I can just use this car, and it's not going to make any difference to that. And that's for me the best way to be doing it. And certainly with the amount of solar we generate around here, I don't think that would even a car is so big it can store power for multiple days for the house. So your days of excess solar drive the days when you have less sort of cloudy days. So that's before you even then fill the car with off-peak power during the winter, during the dark times. But it's whether, I think the big question is, just like EV adoption, there's early adopters who do a lot of DIY themselves to make this all work. gradually, we're going to see these go into mainstream, and it won't be that I have to be running some sort of energy calculation and deciding when I'm filling the car and when I'm going to use renewables and telling it what sort of strategy to take. This is just going to be deferred to your energy provider, who will be throwing their excess that they've got cheap on wholesale into your vehicles and air source heat pump and water storage and whatever, and giving effectively a much lower price for what you're getting as a consumer. And I think the next few years are going to be that transition from people with leather arm patches on their tweed jackets figuring all this out, and people just getting a car on lease and getting their green electricity subsystem for the house sorted out by an energy by an energy provider who figures out that strategy for you. And I think it's going to result. I mean, we've seen total energy demand over the last few years in the United Kingdom going down and down and down, and this is, these vehicle to grid and vehicle to home technologies are going to smooth that out and reduce that even further, as we get away from peaky demand over to smooth demand, locally smoothed using V2H and V2G.
Absolutely. I think cars of the electric vehicles, cars of today, I think have allowed us to potentially look at them as not just A to B or shuttles from A to B. There are things we can plug in, there are things we can integrate, and I think what you mentioned there, that in the few years we could potentially be looking at our car as our home, the battery energy storage of our homes. As well as what you said, unplug it and you've got the school run. It's quite an exciting thought. But I think. Just to wrap up, I guess, today, Ben, I mean, in terms of sort of looking at charging again, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things with sort of pricing and maybe sort of regulation. I mean, in your opinion, what needs to happen to sort of level the public charging with sort of domestic, and do you think that is likely to happen?
I don't think public charging pricing is going to come down to match domestic, and I don't think it has to. Again, coming back to that, I don't think it's possible, because you have to pay for the infrastructure and the space the infrastructure is on and the repairs of the infrastructure, as well as giving it stable power pricing so that people have a reasonable idea before they start charging what it will be at the end. I don't think it could possibly ever compete with domestic pricing. And you've got the point that public charges need to happen quick. So they need to be on very, very big connections or have their own battery backup so that they're able to slurp enough power to give you 200 kilowatts charging rates. That's going to be expensive. And if public chargers, fast chargers, are the charger of last resort, they're the occasional charger when you get caught out at the end of a journey or when you're doing a very, very long journey, the fact that they're more expensive and the fact that there's less of them is not really an issue. You just pay a bit extra because it's one of those few times you need a range extension, those few times you need to top up for a long journey. And the newer battery technologies are allowing us faster and faster charges, so it's not going to be about 2-3 hours. It's going to be sub 1 hour, sub half hour to give you another 150 miles and get you to where you want to go. I think that's going to be stable and a happy trade-off, because even the city dwellers, if we allow them to do more domestic charging, aren't going to be trapped in this kind of petrol equivalent. It's much more like a petrol car in being annoying that you have to go to the petrol station, as well as annoying that it costs so much because it's had to come from various war zones and dictatorships all over the world. I'm just going to be delighted when the politicians realise that energy independence and energy security is national security. Instead of spending our money on wars, we can spend our money on locally sourced renewable energy. And we don't have to have our industries and our normal modes of transport dependent on a global network of shipping damaging oil from places we don't want to have to negotiate with. Places we don't. Currently, we are tolerating and encouraging relationships with countries whose human rights records and whose social, society's actions are ones that we would not want to say are in line with our own beliefs. We don't want to have to, pay homage to these nations. We'd rather say, you want to run yourself like that, that's fine, but we don't want to trade with you. Rather than, yes, sir, that's wonderful. We're very, very happy about, gender inequality. We're very happy about slavery being used. We're very happy about, all sorts of other things being done in the name of stability of oil supply. And all of this is leading us to a better future of energy independence, a better future of no smog in the cities, and to be honest, a better future of not rolling around everywhere in a giant car when we could be using something smaller and lighter in the middle of the cities, but then being able to summon something a bit more appropriate when we do want to go on holiday. These are all the technologies we're going to see coming through, but bit by bit, stage by stage, and the EV infrastructure space is going to help deliver that change.
Well, the exciting times, and I appreciate your time, Ben, and lovely to speak with you, and hopefully get you back on the podcast soon.